Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And in this one, we will be reviewing the Brewmaster Monk as it stands in the Shadowlands beta and for itself moving into Shadowlands the expansion, as it is just a few months around the corner, pretty much. I feel like we're getting pretty close to the pre-patch at this point. So it's a good idea to start checking out the specializations, what's changing, what's new, what's coming back. And most importantly, is it a specialization that you think you could play for a long time without getting bored, as it's looking like Shadowlands is going to be a heavy character progression expansion with investments in leveling up your legendaries and leveling up your soulbind conduits and progressing with your covenants. It's going to be quite a grind. So I feel like it's very important, if not the most important decision to make, is to pick a specialization that at the end of that long road and grind, you're not going to be bored of. Now, I've got a confession here on the Brewmaster Monk. This is a specialization that I probably factually have the least amount of time spent on. I did my best to compensate for that by doing a bunch of research and allowing these training dummies to pound away at my face to sort of feel it out and figure out what's going on with the Brewmaster Monk. So one of the major differences that I noticed, which if you're a Brewmaster player, this is not changing for you. You're already fully aware of these mechanics, but if you're interested in checking out Brewmaster and you've never played it before, is the stagger mechanic. You shrug off attacks, delaying a portion of physical damage based on your agility. It's also a portion of magic damage now, and instead taking it over 10 seconds. It also says affects magical attacks at 35% effectiveness. They have updated it. So basically, rather than all the other tanks who just get hit in the face really hard and lose teeth, you're a little bit more intelligent and you delay some of that damage for later, and then you drink brews to negate that damage over time effect over time. One major change that you're going to notice that is it's still listed on the talent window, it's probably going to get removed at some point, is Iron Skin Brew is no longer a brew, which has basically made the rotation a little bit more new player friendly. So if you were intimidated by Brewmaster because it tanks damage completely differently than every other tank, maybe it seemed too complicated, this change of removing Iron Skin Brew definitely simplifies it a lot while still maintaining the same stagger gameplay. But that's going to be the first thing you notice, is that Iron Skin Brew is actually gone, and it was replaced with Celestial Brew, which is a 24-second cooldown. You swig a strong brew that coalesces purified chi. This is RP, escaping your body into a celestial guard, absorbing 12,000 damage. Purifying stagger damage increases the absorption effect by up to 200%, which you can get really high. Like if I just pound away at this guy here, and I get some stagger damage going, and then start staggering the damage away, you'll notice that I'll be able to get a massive shield. So here I'll stagger, and then I'll activate Celestial. Look at that absorb. It's basically my entire health bar right here. This thing is massively powerful. As to whether or not it's going to end up getting nerfed, I think really begs the question, because at the moment on the beta from the testing, from what I've observed, is that Brewmaster is not by far, but definitely a significantly ahead of the other tanks in terms of its ability to mitigate damage. And one of the main downsides for Brewmaster in the past is that you didn't really have the ability to heal yourself. You were reliant on your healer to do that, which I don't really understand why that's such a big deal, to have to let the person's role do their role. But when the other tanks are able to heal themselves, you're left in a weird situation. And Brewmaster has a main advantage that Guardian Druid, which was a tank that was brought for the reason that it healed itself a lot, has actually been tuned down a bit on Frenzied Regeneration, which is its major heal. So it's not, the Frenzied Regeneration itself isn't healing the Druid as much. It buffs the heals from other people. So bringing the tanks more in line with their own self-sufficiency, warriors are getting more self-healing as well, and prop paladins healing is being rearranged. So it seems like they're trying to bring the tank sustainability power more in line with each other, and this is one way of achieving that, is by introducing Celestial Brew, which is basically just guard with a cooler name and a stronger effect, and it rewards you for proper stagger gameplay, which is really awesome. Another ability coming baseline is Expel Harm, which is really good. Like, this thing is really good. Like, if I just show you on this guy, I'll let him attack me, build up my stagger bar, which is below my energy here, and then I'll use my brew to get rid of it. And then when you pop the guard or whatever, the Celestial Brew, you can use Expel Harm while that's up, and the shield is absorbing the damage, and you can heal yourself up with the Expel Harm. So it does provide a lot of just extra sustainability, as well as a little bit of extra damage to targets around you. So it's really nice. I love having Expel Harm in the rotation. It's good that it's baseline here. You've now got Spinning Crane Kick, just baseline, so you'll be able to do AoE damage. If you need to do AoE damage, this is insane damage, along with being able to get Rushing Jade Wind at the same time. You can pump out a ton of AoE damage, so Spinning Crane Kick, baseline. So I was wondering, so some of the other interesting effects of the Brewmaster is that its taunts don't work as like a normal taunt, like Provoke, for example. This isn't a change, but it's more or less a distinction, because I personally have spent a lot less time on Brewmaster than the other tanks, so I really wanted to like pay attention to what makes a Brewmaster moving into Shadowlands to see if it would interest myself. So if you're someone who's played Brewmaster, I probably just sound redundant, but if you haven't, Provoke, which is your taunt. You taunt the target to attack you, and you cause them to move at 50% increased speed. So you can force a mob into a position at a faster rate, which I thought was interesting in terms of like trying to reposition mobs. It's not like a death grip. Like death grip would immediately pull the target to you, but this does help you reposition things, and it's something entirely unique to a Brewmaster. So if there are any fights or engagements in the raid that would require you to be like an off tank on an ad, and the ad needs to move to a certain location, it's not going to be as effective as a death grip, but it's certainly more effective than just some of the basic taunts in the game. And to go along with that, another ability that's coming back here is Clash, which hopefully ends up working, as the history of this spell has not been too great. But Clash is you and the target will charge at each other, meeting halfway and then rooting. So basically charge death grip in the same button, which in my mind looks pretty cool. Like this is a stationary train dummy, so it's not going to move, but you can see I charge to it, it charges to me. Definitely kind of like that belly bounce feel of a Brewmaster with that one. It's a pretty cool ability, and it could be kind of fun in PvP too, for just trying to relocate people, as Brewmaster has a ton of abilities that just let you move other players around, so you could be super annoying. But that was just something unique that I noticed for the Brewmaster Monk. When we move forward, Touch of Death, baseline to all monks. You'll basically get an execute, and it allows you to clear your stagger damage based on 200% of the damage dealt. So in execute range, this can be used as a nice little mitigation tool, especially on monsters that might enrage when they're at lower health. So your stagger is going to start stacking much higher. You can utilize Touch of Death to remove that stagger. I'm curious to see if some legendaries, when we get to that part of the video, will enable this maybe as gameplay against certain mechanics or bosses that have enrage mechanics, and you could utilize a legendary that basically reduces the cooldown of your Touch of Death and gain access to a secondary defensive cooldown as well as a massive execute. Again, it's going to be really good for leveling, solo content, Torghast, PvP too. I mean, just having an execute rolling around, you can just pop somebody with that. And then, of course, this isn't new, but something to point out for the Brewmaster, if you're worried about not getting invited to content or finding groups, you bring Mystic Touch, which is 5% physical damage to everything you hit pretty much, which is pretty much mandatory for all groups. So as a monk, you're almost at least always going to be desirable in that sense, because you'll provide that buff. But at the moment, you're also just a really strong throughput tank, so you can't really go wrong. You might notice that Blackout Strike is now Blackout Kick. This is likely because of an additional change, which they're going to allow Brewmaster monks to dual wield. I don't think there was an animation for dual wielding, so just turning it into Blackout Kick kind of got around the problem of not having an animation for Blackout Strike having a combat animation. And it currently on the tooltip is going to interact with Shuffle, so that's nice. Also, I'm curious to see if dual wielding ends up being a meta for Brewmaster, or if it's just you can go for whichever one you want. If a two-hander drops, great, you got an upgrade. If two one-handers drop, great, you got an upgrade. The only downside of running a two-handed weapon would be that with two one-handers, if you think about Battle for Azeroth, for example, you can get 2 enchants, and you could get 2 extra corrupt or 1 extra corruption effect. So if there's anything like that, the 2 one-handers are going to get value. And at the moment, unlike Frost, Death Knight, and Fury Warrior, who have distinct passives that give you some sort of unique benefit to using 2 one-handers or 2 two-handers or 1 two-hander, monks at the moment don't have anything that specifically would help you be stronger by using 2 one-handers or 1 two-hander. So I'm curious if they do introduce any passives that would promote you playing with different weapons, or if it's just supposed to be purely cosmetic. I feel like it won't end up being just purely cosmetic, again, because you can enchant 2 weapons as opposed to only being able to enchant 1 if you wear a two-hander. But just something to note. Small little quality of life is that you can use Zen meditation while moving. This is mostly just if the boss goes into a phase where he's no longer attacking you, does some massive nuke, you can do like a mini ice block. But within your rotation, it's not too amazing. When I was researching Brewmaster, I don't know why this spell specifically was named Dave. If anybody that's a Brewmaster main for a long time can tell me why the Ox is named Dave, please tell me down in the comments below, because I don't understand why. But basically, the Celestials are coming back baseline for all of the monk specs, and the Ox one is the tank one. So you get the Ox Celestial. It's a 3-minute cooldown. You summon an effigy of Niu Zhao, the Black Ox, for 25 seconds. Why does it have to make me repeat? Niu Zhao attacks your primary target and frequently stomps, damaging all nearby enemies for 196 plus 25% of the stagger damage recently purified. While active, 25% of damage delayed by stagger is instead staggered by Niu Zhao. So he's going to help you off tank. He's going to help you do more damage. Pretty significant cooldown for the rotation. And then here you go. You can look at Dave. So he'll take some of the stagger damage for you. He'll also stomp some of the purified damage. Once again, playing into the mechanics of stagger and rewarding you for correctly playing, as you'll be getting more damage as a benefit of it. So I think it's pretty cool. You just get him baseline. I feel like he's a lot more interesting as a Celestial than the Mistweaver one at the moment, which just kind of bounces around and heals things and pukes out stuff. It feels like he really interacts with the spec very well. Other than that, trying to just make sure I'm not missing anything here because I'm not reading off of a script. Shuffle is a passive. So Niu Zhao's teaching allows you to shuffle during combat, increasing the effectiveness of your stagger. Shuffle is granted by attacking enemies with your keg smash, blackout kick, and sprinting crane kick. It's not really something that you're going to think about, I don't think, too much. It's just there, and it makes you tankier. At least I wasn't paying too much attention to it. I was just doing my normal damage rotation, keeping things on cooldown, and it kind of just worked its way in, but it's nice for just your own personal durability, of course. Other than that, I think that's it for new baseline abilities. Just double checking. No, I think that's it. So we'll take a look at the talents now, which haven't really been changed too much. Basically, just had to readopt some of the talents based on Ironskin Brew being gone. So now Light Brewing applies to Purifying Brew and Celestial Brew instead of Ironskin Brew. Still just really good, pretty straightforward, great effectiveness and throughput. It's probably just the lock-in. Spitfire Tiger Palm has a 25% chance to reset the cooldown of Breath of Fire. I mean, maybe it's going to be okay for solo content where you don't need to stagger as much damage, and maybe it's just better AoE damage, but all these mechanics that interact with stagger and make your Ox do more damage makes me feel like Light Brewing is just kind of the go-to. Black Ox Brew, to my understanding, is a talent that if you play perfectly might get slightly edged over Light Brewing, but playing it perfectly for a very minor increase in performance is not really that great. So at least for myself, if I was going to pick up Brewmaster, I probably wouldn't be going to that initially, but at least I guess in the future, if I did start to get bored, I would have something to look forward to in terms of trying to increase my skill cap. It's just unfortunate that the increase is not that substantial. At the moment, you'll notice that a lot of spells are being AoE capped in Shadowlands, so that instead of your AoE, like Spinning Crane Kick, hitting all targets, actually Spinning Crane Kick looks like it does still hit all targets. Maybe that was a bad example, at least on the tooltip. Rushing Jade Wind here, so it's only up to 6 enemies from the AoE. This is a really bad example to look at. So a lot of AoE abilities are being capped at a small limit of targets. So getting threat on multiple targets is going to be a pretty big deal, which likely is going to increase the value of the Summon Black Ox statue. 10-second cooldown, you put the Ox statue down, pulses threats to all enemies, and you may cast Provoke on the statue to taunt all enemies to the statue. So getting threat generation, if you're having a hard problem or you're noticing that, because that's going to be a pretty dramatic difference when you log in and start getting into dungeons, switching over to the Ox statue initially to try and get through that through that kind of learning period is going to be great. But then, of course, the Ring of Peace hasn't changed, but Ring of Peace is just awesome utility, as you can put it down and you can bounce targets out of mechanics or reposition them. It's really good just in general. And then here, Exploding Keg to replace the Ox, our little Nizao guy. You get Exploding Keg, which is just Legion as a talent. It seems like a really interesting spell. On a 1-minute cooldown, 40-yard range, Exploding Keg hurls a flaming keg at the target location, dealing fire damage to nearby enemies and causing them to miss their melee attacks for the next 3 seconds. When I was trying this out, it looks like the debuff, it doesn't, I need to test it again here. Why did I just put it on cooldown? All right, we'll look at it back again, but I feel like it's not interacting the way that the tooltip reads. I'm not sure if it hasn't been updated properly, because the way that you would read this is that melee attacks just will flat out miss, right? Like you'll dodge, you'll get evasion for 3 seconds, which would be super effective if it works like that, especially on certain Mythic Plus weeks where you need to stop Necrotic from stacking. Or maybe there's a leech effect on a monster where when they start attacking, they start healing themselves. So by being able to make them miss, or if you're taking an exorbitant amount of stagger damage and you need a second to get your brews reset, this could be great for staggering that out, staggering the stagger. But if it doesn't actually make the attacks miss, as what I was looking into it, it was just reducing the damage they dealt by a significant portion, which I should be able to test on this training dummy, which is the tank one, in a moment when it's off cooldown. We'll have to see. So if I use this on the tank training dummy, so I attack him, he's able to hit me, right? If I use this, he should now no longer hit me, but you see he's still hitting me. So it's not providing the actual miss effect that the tooltip says, which is really misleading. Like, honestly, the tooltip should be changed to dramatically reduces melee attacks damage, because it doesn't actually miss. And then Rushing Jadewind is just so much overall effectiveness that it's pretty much the standard go-to. So unless they change this to be actually miss their attacks so that you can play around certain affixes and certain mechanics, I don't see this getting much play. And that's the same case in PvP too. If you wanted to use it in PvP, you can't make anyone miss their attacks. That could actually be a unique factor. Like you make a Death Knight miss their Death Strike and then they don't heal. It could be fun. So I kind of hope that they do. Maybe it would be too strong, but I kind of hope that they do change this to work the way that it looks like it's intended to work. Celestial Flames is down here now. Drinking from brews has a 30% chance to coat the monk with Celestial Flames. While Celestial Flames is active, Spinning Crane Kick applies Breath of Fire, and Breath of Fire reduces damage affected by enemies that deal to you by 5%. It's just 5% damage reduction. High Tolerance is still the baseline go-to, I think, at the moment. Stagger is 5% more effective, and you gain 15% haste based on your current stagger level. Celestial Flames, maybe at the start of the expansion when your gear is really bad, and you're taking a ton of damage, this basically is just, you get 5% damage reduction. That's basically what it is. The uptime of the debuffs is already really high, so you don't really get too much out of it. But if you really feel like you need 5% extra damage reduction, you're dying too much, you could try it instead of High Tolerance, but High Tolerance just still looks like a really good one. Blackout Combo, which is a passive. Your Blackout Kick also empowers your next ability, so your Tiger Palm will deal massive damage, 100% more. Breath of Fire cooldown is reduced by 3 seconds. Keg Smash reduces the remaining cooldown on your brews by an additional 2 seconds. And Celestial Brew pauses stagger damage by 3 seconds. So this could have interesting synergies with some of the legendaries when we get to them. More importantly, based around Keg Smash, because you can get access to Keg Smash more frequently through some legendaries. But other than that, unless you're running that specific build, I think that it's likely that Brewmaster still has a pretty cookie cutter talent tree. There's no new honor talents, so nothing interesting or exciting there for Brewmaster. But at this point now in the video, let's start looking at the covenants. This is going to be your biggest decision in Shadowlands, is which covenant do you want to align with, what ability do you want to go for, what passive soulbind conduits are behind the covenant, which in a way, at the moment on the beta, I feel like you're making a decision without actually having all of the information of that decision available. There's like some fine print that's written in invisible ink. And those are specifically the soul binds, which is just a really complicated word for secondary talent tree. Basically, every covenant will have a talent tree, and it will have 3 choices of talent trees. So you'll pick which one you want when you get into the covenant. But you don't get to see the talent trees until you've picked the Covenant. At least not on the beta, right? So on the beta, I can look at the strengths. It will show me what the transmog is, really cool. Tell me a little bit of the story, show me what the mount is, and give me the 2 abilities that I'll get. But it won't show me the soul binds unless I go in. And in some cases, the soul binds could actually be a deciding factor on maybe making what is a lackluster ability. This is not in this case, but what it may be a lackluster ability actually ends up being really awesome from a passive and the talent tree themselves that you don't get to see. So one point of feedback I would have is that you should be able to look at the soul binds. There should be another window that lets you look at the soul binds and see what talent trees you've got to look at as well. Because otherwise you're making that decision if you're just a new player and you don't do a bunch of research, you're going to pick this Covenant without even knowing what's going on in the back line. And some of that stuff's very important. But regardless, Fleshcraft, 2 minutes cooldown. You start channeling a shield on yourself for 20% of your maximum health. If channeled near a corpse, you get an extra benefit. And then in the secondary talent trees for the Necro Lords, you can amplify Fleshcraft to make you immune to crowd control while channeling, and 4 seconds afterwards, you can amplify it to gain stat benefits by consuming corpses. So think of it like Cannibalize for undead. It definitely fits well in with the fantasy. It could hold you back in high keys. Like, is it really worth the time to channel this before going into another pull? Is going to be the debate really for this. The advantage you have as a Brewmaster is that you're high mobility. So if you take a couple of seconds to channel the Fleshcraft on a monster, cheat torpedo, you're pretty much back with your group. So they might not have that drawback as a Brewmaster specifically. And more importantly, you get Bone Dust Brew, which 40-yard range, 1 minute cooldown. You hurl brew created from the bones of your enemies at the ground. Doesn't sound too tasty. Coating all targets struck for 10 seconds. Your abilities have a 35% chance to affect the target a second time at 35% effectiveness as shadow damage or healing. Tiger Palm and Keg Smash reduce the cooldown of your brews by an additional 1 second when striking enemies with Bone Dust Brew. So again, really good synergies with some of the legendaries that are pretty awesome when we get to that part of the video that have to do with Keg Smash and that cooldown reduction interaction. It's going to be super important to your overall mechanics. This ability, I think, is the smoothest one for Brewmaster. It fits in excellently with the stagger mechanics. It has a cool secondary effect tied to it, and it seems pretty awesome in that regard. But we'll be able to test out the abilities. Fleshcraft. Again, if you were going to use this in a dungeon, right, so you channel it on a monster, and then you could cheat torpedo, get back to your group. So I don't think it'll be totally useless for a Brewmaster. But then Bone Dust Brew, if we utilize it and we're attacking and we put our brews on cooldown, when we use Keg Smash the second time and Tiger Palm, we'll be able to start reducing the cooldown of our brew. That really big absorb effect, remember. So if you want to be a reliable tank at the start, I feel like this one's going to be a good pick. And then your interactions, it's just going to be really good synergy between the two. It does some good AoE damage, and it fits really well with the kit. So Bone Dust Brew and Necrolords look pretty solid, in my opinion, for Brewmaster. Venthyr over here. We'll talk to our buddy General Draven. You get the Vampire Clan from Rivendreth. I don't like looking at the mount. If you've watched my videos, you know that I pretty quickly close that window whenever that pops up. But you'll get the Door of Shadows, which is a 1 minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast, teleport. Now, as a monk, you've already got a lot of teleports. You've already got a lot of ways to move around, so it's not 100% necessary. It could, though, be mandatory depending on dungeon routing. If doing a dungeon, you get a really big skip that saves a substantial amount of time. Curious to see if they let that fly, because then it would be like required to have 5 Venthyrs to use Door of Shadows to get that dungeon skip. I feel like they probably wouldn't let that go if it was that big of an advantage. But it's definitely a cool teleport because you can go up and down walls, over gaps, which you otherwise wouldn't be able to unless you already had your portal on the other side. So it's definitely a cool, like, traversing mobility cooldown. Much cooler than the other options for the Covenants. But Fallen Order, which is the monk specific spell, it's a 3 minute cooldown. I'm already not a super big fan of any Covenant spells that are like, especially the Paladin one, Hallowed Consecration, 4 minute cooldown. Like, this one's 3 minutes. You open a Mystic Portal for 24 seconds. Every 2 seconds, it summons a spirit of your order's Fallen Ox, Crane, and Tiger Adepts for 6 seconds. Fallen Ox Adepts assist for an additional 2 seconds and will also attack your enemies with Breath of Fire. I'm curious I wonder if that would have synergies with Celestial Flames. So if they would all apply a 5% damage reduction, because right now the main problem is that this is basically just a damage cooldown. You just activate it, you're going to pump out a ton of damage, and it doesn't interact with you as a tank too much. It would be different if maybe the Ox Adepts taunted random monsters, so they'd be like Trents for a Druid. Maybe that would be too powerful, but it's a 3-minute cooldown. Because then at the moment it's just damage. Does it do enough damage to be worth taking? And it's purely a damage cooldown. I feel like incorporating something to do with either the Ox Adepts taunt mobs, so that you can maybe drop necrotic stacks, or just get your stagger under control or reposition if you need to run away, would be more interesting. But at the moment, I believe it's just a damage cooldown. We'll test it out though. We've got the Door of Shadows, your teleport. Again, probably one of the coolest mobility spells in the game because you can go anywhere with it. A lot of cool traversing, especially in like PvP too. But the Fallen Order is just summoning mirror images basically that come in. We'll try the Breath of Fire. We'll see if any sort of debuffs go up, but I feel like it's not. Celestial Brew needs to be active. Let's see. So it does seem like it applies multiple stacks of the 5% damage reduction. That's interesting. You could get 20% damage reduction during this window of time. So maybe that's their intent here, to try and make Celestial Flames more competitive. I'm definitely happy to see that it interacts with that, because otherwise this is not that great of a talent. And then it also incorporates the Fallen Order more as a defensive cooldown option. So if they also use Breath of Fire, that then we need to also consider if there are any other synergies, right? Any other talents that would enhance, which I don't see. It would basically just be Celestial Flames. So you could turn this into a really powerful cooldown. I guess the only major downside is that you've already got this massive absorb shield, and it would only be during that 3-minute cooldown window. But it could give you a nice, just really good 3-minute cooldown damage reduction wall, because your Fortifying Brew's 7-minute cooldown. Obviously, it's a little bit more effective than just damage reduction, but curious. I like that it has interactions with the talents. That makes it a lot less bland than just, there's a bunch of monk images that attack things for you. So maybe if they could add a couple bit more synergies to it, it would be more interesting. I personally like the taunt effect. You could taunt enraged mobs, taunt necrotic. Like, there's a lot more playability to it, and then it really justifies it being a 3-minute cooldown. Other benefits that you don't get to see when you're going to initially pick the Covenant is that General Draven himself is a talent tree, and he has one where when you're below 40% health, you take 10% less damage. So really good, just passive damage reduction mitigation there through General Draven. So maybe if they enhance this, it gets buffed. I could see it being a good option, especially if it enhances the base kit or interacts better with the base kit. It's cool that it interacts with Celestial Flames. Hopefully it isn't bugged. I didn't test if it was bugged or not, right, to see if it actually applied it. I would just assume it does because the debuff is up 4 times. But hopefully they'll properly test that adequately, make sure that it works. When we look at the Night Fae here, we get this nice little pretty transmog. Nice little pretty goat. I feel like there's a lot of goats in the game, though. The Necrolord mount really feels unique. But Night Fae, you get Soul Shape. It's really not going to be that useful to you as Brewmaster. You already just have Chi Torpedo, which is basically what Soul Shape is. At most, I see you using this if you've somehow exhausted all of your other mobility. That's the only time you would actually use it mechanically. And then maybe other than that, save yourself time from mounting up between a pull. Just use Soul Shape to blink in. It's just more mobility. I do suppose if you're going to be a flag carrier in PvP, you would get use of it because you would be using your Chi Torpedoes on cooldown, and you get even more mobility. You can be super annoying to catch. But in PvE, not too much outside of your normal baseline kit. Feline Stomp, which is a 30-yard range, 30-second cooldown. Strike the ground fiercely to expose a Feline for 30 seconds, dealing 1200 nature damage and igniting enemies with Breath of Fire. Your abilities have a 6% chance of resetting the cooldown of Feline Stomp while fighting on a Feline. Curious, does this Breath of Fire stack with our already existing Breath of Fire, or does it replace it? Because if it stacks, then again, you might get some benefit from Celestial Flame, but let's take a look at the abilities themselves. Again, the Soul Shape is just blinking around. When you're in a city, it lasts indefinitely. I also think that it's causing it to not work the way that it will in combat. I don't believe you're able to use abilities without it canceling. Yeah, so now it's canceling when I use abilities. It's just purely for mobility. But Feline Stomp, which is just going to be a line, a random drawn line that looks really awesome. Let's apply, first apply our Fire Breath, which it doesn't apply. Interesting. When we use Feline Stomp, it does apply that effect. So you would get the 5% damage reduction. If they stacked, if I could tell, because the training W doesn't let you apply yours apparently, it would be interesting. You could get 10% damage reduction from it. But you want to be, more importantly, fighting on it. So standing on top of it, that way you would have a chance of, I believe, reducing its cooldown, a 6% chance of resetting its cooldown. And then if you got really lucky, you could just get a ton of these stomps out and cover the entire ground with Feline Stomps. The main downside that I'm noticing right now is that it doesn't actually, you would have to move. So like as a tank, you want to get the mob situated. Everybody's going to start AoEing, right? Around that area. And then generally moving it is only if you need to move it. Otherwise, you're just making it more likely that your DPS's cooldowns are going to be missing from AoE. So the fact that it looks like you have to move, right? I'd have to move forward, which if this was a monster would then reposition. I suppose if it's not too disruptive to your actual group, it's not a big deal, but I feel like just making it so the Feline comes from under your character would be a lot better of a solution for that than trying to reposition and having, if mobs cleave or do any sort of AoE stun in front of them, so like that could be really disruptive. It's also kind of boring. It's just damage, which I suppose if it does a lot of damage in Mythic Plus, like it's AoE damage, you're going to want that. I guess the interaction is supposed to be that it applies Breath of Fire, and then the synergy would be you can get Celestial Flames. Maybe if there's some legendaries or conduits that interact with Breath of Fire, all right. It looks really cool. It's just kind of boring. Like the animation doesn't match the effect, in my mind at least, for the Night Fae. But now moving over to the Kirian, the final Covenant choice. Get this Plate Mog, get a little Tiger with Angels. You'll get the Steward, which will just give you a Vial, which is just a Hellstone. You're probably ignoring the healing part of this when it comes to PvE, and more importantly focused on its removal of curses, disease, poisons, and bleeds, which you can remove diseases and poisons, so it would really only be curses and bleeds. There are at the moment a lot of bleed mechanics in PvE, so you will likely get a lot of use from this and be able to assist your healer out quite a lot. If you're going into Torghast by yourself and there's ever a curse that's a massive detriment to you on a level, being able to remove it is going to be a great addition. And then also Weapons of Order, which is a 2-minute cooldown. For the next 30 seconds, your mastery is increased by 10%. Additionally, Keg Smash cooldown is reset instantly, and enemies hit by Keg Smash take 5% increased damage from you for 8 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So you could get some massive damage from this with some of the legendaries. So we'll try out the Kirian. Again, you summon in your little owl dude. He delivers you your potion. It goes in your bag. You just want to make sure you set it up as a keybind. And then if you need it as a heal, you could. Think of it like a healing elixir, but it would be definitely more important to look at your debuffs and make sure that you don't have any important curses or disease effects on yourself. But with this, you could use Keg Smash, reset Keg Smash, and then Keg Smash again. And then if you had a legendary, you would get another Keg Smash, and then you could start stacking this up pretty high. So if you were getting a rotation off effectively and able to stack this, you could get a ton of damage from it. That seems pretty insane. Doesn't look like it's stacking at the moment, at least not on, maybe it's actually falling off. It looks like it's falling off. So it seems pretty difficult to actually get this thing stacked up and get this thing going, which is a little bit of a downside to it. But let's just double check the mastery for Brewmaster. So what major benefit are we getting from our mastery here by increasing it? Each time you are hit by a melee attack, you are hit with a Blackout Kick, you gain stacking 17% increased dodge chance until your next successful dodge. Okay, so just more dodge, more likelihood. You also increase your attack power, so you just get more damage output. It's synergized well with the stagger because then you can dodge and get more time to reset your brews. being able to just keg smash twice in a row seems pretty good. It's not as interactive, I think, as the Necrolord one. The Necrolord one is standing out to me as like the best designed overall, because it interacts with damage, with your stagger rotation, with your cooldowns, with the entire kit. Feline Stomp is kind of just boring damage, might be kind of annoying because you got to reposition it. Venthyr hopefully gets a couple bit more interactions with your baseline kit, but its passives and its mobility definitely carry the Covenant. And then Kirian is, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's going to give you a lot of extra dodge. It's going to give you nice damage output with Keg Smash. And if you are able to stack it, you get even more damage output. So I feel like it's in a spot where, obviously, if you want to min-max and be the absolute top 1% World First Raider Mythic Plus Keystone Runner, like, yeah, there's probably one of these after tuning that's ultimately going to be the best, right? But if you're just somebody who wants to play and have some fun, I don't really feel like you're going to be going massively wrong with any of these choices. And they all somewhat focus on AoE aside from Venthyr. But Venthyr might be a lot of single target damage to compensate for that. So hopefully you won't have a choice where you're a meme. It doesn't seem like any of the choices, at least outstanding to me, would make you a meme. I personally would go with Necrolord because I love the interaction with your stagger, with your cooldowns. It just seems like, on the whole, a really interactive and fun spell. But that's just me personally. If you wanted to go for something else, obviously you can. Looking now at the legendaries, we've got General Monk legendaries. Escape from Reality. After you use Transcendence Transfer, you can use Transcendence Transfer again within 10 seconds, ignoring its cooldown. That could be really good in PvP. Not probably having a great spot anywhere else, but I suppose during this time, the healing done by your Vivify is increased by 50%. You'll be refunded 50% of its cost. You don't really cast Vivify as Brewmaster. Again, I guess if you were by yourself in a battleground, you would. So if you want to be really annoying in a battleground, this legendary would be a good one, but it doesn't seem like it has great potential in terms of actual output in the game. This was the one I was considering. Fatal Touch. Touch of Death cooldown is reduced by 60 seconds. Then you would gain the benefits of its stagger mechanics if we look back at the game, because Touch of Death for Brewmaster also clears stagger damage based on 200% of the damage it deals. The main problem is that you're only going to be using it at 15% health or less, so you would only get that benefit very infrequently. So it's probably not going to be the go-to, I think, in general, but probably more for Windwalker, right? Even though all monks get it. Invoker's Delight, you gain 12% haste for 15 seconds after summoning your Celestial. It's kind of boring, but it makes Dave the Ox. I hope somebody lets me know why it's named Dave down below. Makes Dave a little bit cooler, or you're a little bit faster during Dave's time period here. Roll and Chi Torpedo has 1 additional charge. Again, I feel like Monk was already in the spot where it had enough mobility, but if you, again, wanted to be really annoying, you could be really annoying getting another Chi Torpedo. But in terms of PvE, you probably don't really care too much about these. Maybe this 12% haste, but again, it's a 3-minute cooldown. Brewmaster specific legendaries. Charred Passions, your Breath of Fire ignites your right leg in flame for 8 seconds, causing your Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick to deal 30% additional damage as fire damage, and refresh the duration of your Breath of Fire on the target. Now, I'm curious if that has synergies with the Venthyr Covenant, because when we just tested it, right, the images applied Breath of Fire, which had the 5% damage reduction debuff, and would ignite your Spinning Crane Kick, and then you could extend the duration of those Breath of Fires, so you could have 20% damage reduction up all the time, and you would have massive dot damage. Could have synergies with Venthyr, possibly. I'm really digging deep there with the theory crafting, but it's possible. Also, just getting Spinning Crane Kick to deal more damage is great AoE. Mighty Pour, Iron Skin Brew. Why is this here? Increases your armor by 30% and has a 1% chance to not consume a charge. I feel like this hasn't been updated. I'm like 99% sure Iron Skin Brew doesn't exist. I'm double checking now, but I'm like 99% sure it doesn't. So is that meant to say Celestial Brew? Because it definitely doesn't exist when I'm looking at it. You guys can look at it with me too if you want, but Iron Skin Brew does not exist. So I feel like maybe this just hasn't been updated in a while. But so maybe we'll just ignore it unless it's Celestial. It's probably Celestial Brew, right? Increases your armor by 30% and has a 1% chance to not consume a charge. That's a really small amount. I mean, you would get a massive absorb if this is Celestial Brew. You're a leather wearer, so you don't really have high armor value anyway. You're definitely dogpiling all of your defense into one ability and then relying on some RNG, so maybe not that great. Xiaohao's Might. Tiger Palm has a 10% chance to deal 300% normal damage, reducing the remaining cooldown of your brews by 1 additional second. That could have really good synergies with the Stone Skin Brew for Necrolords. I feel like that would be a solid go-to for the Necrolords. Again, 10% chance, not that great. Maybe the Spinning Crane Kick AoE stands out a little bit more, but getting those brews available faster is definitely a lot of damage mitigation. Stormstat's Last Keg. Keg Smash deals 30% additional damage and has 1 additional charge. So this seems like it stands out really well with the Kirian, right? Where you can reset the cooldown of Keg Smash. It does more damage. You have more Keg Smashes to stack it more often. This seems like it just has direct synergy with Kirian. A lot of these legendaries kind of like standing out to go along with a specific covenant. So kind of interesting in that regard. Now we'll look at the Conduits, which are a new feature in Shadowlands. As I described earlier, Soul Binds are the secondary talent trees given to each covenant. You'll have 3 talent trees in the covenant to choose from. These are basically sockets you put into the talent trees for special unique effects. And right now for the Brewmaster, Potency, which is going to be throughput. So Scalding Brew, Keg Smash deals an additional 20% damage affected by Breath of Fire. Interested to know if that would apply to the Venthyr Covenant having multiple Breath of Fire. Does that mean Keg Smash does, if you had 4 of them, right? 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20%. I can't do the math. That's easy math, and I can't do it. Like 80 or 100% damage. I feel like if it did do that, that'd be pretty insane. I mean, that would make Venthyr really good if it did. I feel like it doesn't. Probably only applies to 1 Breath of Fire, but massive damage would great synergy with the Kirian Covenant, and great synergy with the Legendary to get another Keg Smash along with the Kirian Covenant. So a lot of huge hitting Keg Smash potential with that build if you wanted to be like a Keg Smasher. Brewmaster. Walk with the Ox. Abilities that grant Shuffle reduce the cooldown of Invoke Niu Zhao, the Black Ox, by 5.5 seconds, and Niu Zhao's Stomp deals an additional 10% damage. So if you wanted to build yourself around being a Dave Brewmaster, that legendary that give you haste during him, if you could get his cooldown down pretty far, it looks like this it doesn't. So as you level these conduits up, they get stronger and stronger, which makes this Keg Smash one even more ludicrous in my mind. But it doesn't look like when you level up this one, you get cooldown reduction up. You would get more damage from his Stomp. I feel like you're going to use Keg Smash all the time. This would just be better damage rather than getting, better damage during this cooldown window. Looking now at the Potency Conduits for Covenants. So these will buff the Covenant spells themselves. Weapons of Order's duration is increased by 5 seconds, so more opportunities to stack it even higher. The Mastery bonus is increased, so more dodge potential, more attack power, more damage. Can't really go wrong with that. I feel like if you went Weapons of Order along with the Keg Smash potency, if there's 2 potency slots, that would be a lot of damage. Venthyr, the Fallen Order monks deal 20% more damage and healing. I mean, it's just more throughput, but I really wish that the interactions of the spell fit better with the kit. That's the only thing really, but you can't go wrong with more throughput. Bone Dust Brew for the Necrolord here with the Bone Marrow hops will be Bone Dust Brew's shadow damage or healing is increased by 20%. And when Bone Dust Brew deals shadow damage or healing, it reduces its cooldown by 0.5 seconds. Again, already just playing into a great synergized ability. Can't really go wrong with that. Way of the Fae, so Night Fae's Potency Conduit. Feline Stomp does more damage per target, up to a maximum of 50% additional targets, so really encouraging you to pull big. The only downside of Feline Stomp is that it's just kind of boring. You ignite them with Breath of Fire. I guess it gives you another opportunity to apply Breath of Fire, and then maybe if you had this Keg Smash legendary or a conduit, you would get synergy there for big AoE. It really just depends on the tuning here, right? If Feline Stomp does a ton of damage, it's the top damage for AoE, then maybe you just go at baseline. But in my mind, it's the prettiest looking one, but it's also the most boring, which is unfortunate. It would be nice if it had a secondary effect tied to it. Monk Endurance Soulbind Conduits. These are defense, fortifying ingredients, fortifying brew. I'm already ignoring this because fortifying brew is a 7-minute cooldown for Brewmaster. Grants you a shield equal to 5% of your maximum health. 7-minute cooldown. Probably not that great. Other specs of Monk get a much lower cooldown, fortifying brew, so more value from it. The next Conduit, Grounding Breath. When you cast Vivify on yourself, okay, already don't do that pretty much ever. Its heal is increased by 10%, and it has a chance to refund its cost. Maybe if you're doing Battlegrounds and you need to cast this, but okay, look at this, Harm Denial. Expel Harm's healing is increased by 20%. Okay, instant heal that also does damage, and I press pretty much on cooldown, and it doesn't negatively impact my flow at all while I'm playing. All right, this is the go-to. Easy choice. Easy choice. Oh, wait, there's more. There's more. Celestial Effervescence. I got that one, right? While under the effects of Celestial Brew, your effects that heal you are increased by 20%. Interesting. So they're basically taking Frenzied Regen from Guardian, where when Frenzied Regen is up, you get healed more, and giving it to Brewmaster. So you'll also get that effect, which is nice because during that Celestial Brew, after you've kind of mitigated a lot of stagger, you're going to not be really high health. So it'll help you restore that health while you've got the shield to protect you. That's nice synergy. Evasive Stride. During Shuffle or Heavy Stagger, it has a 2% chance to heal you instead of dealing damage. So you're going really hard on the RNG there. And you're also going into a really risky level of stagger for a very small chance for it to heal you. Maybe later on in the expansion when this Conduit's been leveled up and this is higher than 2%, that could be really good. But with it at 2%, you're taking a pretty big risk there when you could just get more healing during your powerful cooldown, and you could just have Expel Harm doing more. So those two seem like the standout ones to me, at least. Monk Finesse Soulbind Conduits. These are utility. Dizzying Tumble. Targets affected by your leg sweep deal 5% less damage for 5 seconds. Can't go wrong with that in PvE, just a little bit of damage reduction. Lingering Numbness. When paralyzed or paralysis ends, your target's movement speed is reduced by 60%. You don't really care. If anything, that might be annoying because usually in PvE, when you use Paralyze, it's the start of a pull, and then you want that monster as soon as the Paralyze ends to get back into the group faster. This is like actually negatively impacting that. It would move slower. This seems like more of a PvP Conduit than it would for PvE. And even in PvP, it's kind of lackluster. Swift Transcendence. Transfer increases your movement speed by 10%. You want a little bit of extra movement speed there. It's probably better use in PvP than PvE, but you could get a bit of an extra sprint, especially if you pre-planned this on a mechanic that involves moving around the room a lot. And at the start of the pull, you put your transfer where you're going to need to move, and then maybe you need to pick up adds. That's going to help you pick up adds. It could be useful there. Tumbling Technique. Blackout Kick has a 5% chance to grant you a charge of roll, and I assume Chi Torpedo. Okay. So you can just go for some RNG mobility, guaranteed mobility, probably PvP, not really that great, or straight damage reduction. I feel like if you're going to do a lot of Mythic Plus, probably straight damage reduction is going to be a lot better for you than the other options, but the other ones could be kind of cool or fun if you wanted to go for them. But that's it here pretty much for the Brewmaster. We're reviewing all of the tank specializations. I think I've only got Blood Death Knight left, and then we're going to be doing a tank tier list. The main factor of the tier list is going to be like fun and how long can I play a spec without getting bored of it. Brewmaster is getting a bunch of cool stuff brought back to it baseline. Some interesting cosmetic changes with being able to use dual wield and two-handers. You got a lot of extra AoE. They're shoring up some of the weaknesses, like its lack of ability to heal itself. The Covenant abilities seem pretty awesome and pretty unique for the monk in general. Like, I'm pretty impressed with it overall. The fact that it's got an entirely unique way of mitigating damage is definitely intriguing. If I was going to be mainly a tank. And then obviously right now at the moment it's performing insanely well on the beta testing, but you might want to not go off that 100% because it's still in beta. Even at the start of an expansion, I feel like that's when things are most likely to change. But it seems like Brewmaster has a good shot in Shadowlands, and I like that it's got that unique vibe to it over the other tanks. It's something that it's got my interest now. I wasn't really planning on tanking because I do PvP a lot more than PvE, but you know, maybe if I'm gonna pick up Mistweaver and then I want to use Brewmaster as an off spec, it's definitely intrigued my interest. If you're a tank player, I feel like it's looking really solid and cool, and it might be worth checking out that unique playstyle that Brewmaster brings if you've never experienced it, or if you're worried about it being too challenging. With the introductions of Celestial Brew and the removal of Ironskin Brew, it looks a lot less complicated and a lot less intimidating initially. So it feels like this would be the time if you were going to check out Brewmaster and you never have. If you were already playing Brewmaster, they're basically just enhancing the stuff that you already liked. But that's pretty much it for the Brewmaster. I hope you enjoyed the video. If I missed something or you just want to call me an idiot, that's what the comments are for down below. Leave a like if you liked the video. Please subscribe to the channel as it does help me out greatly, and it notifies you when my content is live, and I am uploading regularly every day, and I'm looking to try and make sure that the content on the channel is constantly updated to the current build on the beta or when the game actually launches. And the main purpose of the channel is to be a resource, provide information that would otherwise maybe you'd be buried in text or buried behind these walls of the covenants that you don't get to check out, to make sure that you're making the right decision for your personal gameplay and your personal experience and enjoyment. And other than that, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.